I stumbled across this condition called endometriosis and kind of read through all the symptoms and was like, this is literally what is wrong with me. Social media can be a really fickle place, and it's important to just remember that there is a bigger story behind everything that you're kind of consuming on there. I wasn't scared of finding out that I did have endometriosis. I was scared of coming out and someone telling me that there was nothing there. People always assume that I was a really sporty kid who did cross country at school, and actually I was the kid with the letter from their mum every week that said I had some weird sickness that meant I couldn't do sport. I'm Lillie. I am a marathon distance runner and also a coach as well. I'm founder of Train Passer, which is a women's online run coaching collective. And I also do a lot of work into raising awareness around endometriosis and adenomyosis, which I was diagnosed with a couple of years ago.
Okay, I want to start on the running journey because there's a lot I want to cover.
Yeah.
Where did this kind of love affair with running first start? And at that point in your life, if you were to tell yourself, like, this is going to be my job or my career moving forwards, what do you think past Lillie would have thought?
I mean, hilarious, and most of my friends still think it's absolutely hilarious as well. And I'm sure at some point, maybe like my PE teacher from secondary school will stumble across something and just have pure confusion over what has happened. Because I absolutely was not a sporty individual whatsoever. But yeah, for me, I guess kind of growing up and throughout school, I was never overly active. Like, I did the team sports that you had to do, so things like netball and a bit of hockey, and I was a really keen dancer. That was kind of my thing, I suppose. I was always the dancer of the friendship group, not the runner. The runner is very weird. But I was always the dancer of the friendship group, and then kind of finished my A-levels, decided not to go to university, moved to London, and just completely lost interest in dance, any level of activity, essentially. And it was back in 2017 that my granddad sadly passed away, and my sister and I wanted to fundraise some money for a charity that was kind of close to his care. And we basically just asked all of our friends, what would you sponsor us to do? And apparently the idea of us running was absolutely hilarious. So we did 12 races across the 12 months of the year. So we did one race every month, and there was a couple of half marathons, but there were mainly like 5Ks and 10Ks. And I just caught the bug and never stopped. And my sister's never laced up a pair of trainers since. So yeah, that's kind of where it starts, really. And then I guess if I looked back at kind of the Lillie who did those first couple of races, I had no confidence at all. I mean, my training was non-existent. I had no confidence at all. But I suddenly found that this sport helped my mental health so much. It kind of gave me something to look toward and something to work towards, which was just something I hadn't had for a really, really long time. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird start. People always assume that I was a really sporty kid who did cross country at school, and actually I was the kid with the letter from their mum every week that said I had some weird sickness that meant I couldn't do sport.
What I really love about the kind of story that you have is that a lot of people will relate to, you know, doing a single marathon or a single race, but I like the fact that it was a race a month, because maybe not knowing at that point, you were kind of building what is so important in running, that kind of consistency, and you always had something to look forward to. Do you think maybe if it was just a one-off, you wouldn't quite be in the same position as you are now?
Yeah, I've never thought about it really, but yeah, I don't think it would necessarily be the same, because I wouldn't have had that thing that once I'd done that one, I've got to keep going because there's another one in a couple of weeks and things like that. And I think it's never something that we did deliberately to keep us going. It was more that we knew that we weren't going to be at the level to run a marathon, for example, and therefore we had to do something that wasn't just kind of like one 10K or one 5K. So for us, it was, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to doing something every single month for this. So could you hold yourself accountable to making us a small donation? Or we had people who donated like on a monthly basis as well, which was like quite nice. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one. I'd like to think I'd have carried on with it, but maybe not.
Did it become habit? Like once that 12th month and that 12th race was done, was it just kind of not a question that you went out and you ran? That was kind of your thing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably about 3/4 of the way through the 12 months where I then signed up for a marathon the following year. So I think probably I was a little bit worried that it was coming to an end and I needed that next thing to kind of continue to keep me accountable to it. And my running wasn't something that I did like every single day. And it was very much at that time I'll fit it around my life. Oh, if I'm doing something with my friends this weekend, the run goes in the bin. Like it wasn't something that I was really, really like, this is what I do on a Monday. This is what I do on a Tuesday. I also really enjoyed at the time going to like spin classes and hip classes and things like that. So it was still quite dynamic in terms of what I did training wise at that point. Like it was plenty to get me through the races that we were doing, but it was kind of as I got to 6 months or so into doing them that I realized that maybe if I did have some really good structured kind of training and I did try a little bit harder, that maybe I could be a bit better at it as well. But yeah, I caught the bug to the extent that I then signed up for a marathon that was 4 or 5 months after the end of that year. So it meant I just had something else to kind of go on to and do. And then classically crossed the finish line of that marathon and was like, never again. And in the pub that afternoon booked another one. So
yeah, that's what always happens.
Yeah.
Do you remember that moment when, because I think we've all had it in our running journey, where it becomes a bit more serious and when you realize that adding that structure does work? Like I can remember being out on a session when I first started getting coached and thinking, oh wow, this is why people do sessions. This is why people don't just go out and run, because actually this is significantly changing me as a runner.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I did the whole challenge in 2017 kind of by myself. I did 2018 by myself as well. So didn't have a coach or anything at that point. I had started joining like a running group and things. So some things that I was doing had like a little bit more structure to them. Like I might go along to the occasional track session or push myself a little bit harder because I was running with other people. But it was really 2019. So January 1st, 2019 is when I started working with my coach, who I'm still with now. Don't know, hasn't got rid of me yet, to be honest. But started working with Adam at the beginning of 2019 and had set myself up for that happening. So I think we initially had a conversation in kind of October, November the year before. And I'd been like, I think I'm ready to be coached, but I've got my marathon in December and I've started that by myself and I'll get through that myself. But coming out the other side of it, kind of had Christmas and then was like, no, I really want to see what I can do with this from here. And I guess that's kind of the time where I started taking it a lot more seriously. I mean, I think it's an easy thing to say, but in general, once you're paying somebody money for something, it makes you slightly more accountable to things, because things like, even if you've got a personal trainer, like you're going to turn up on Thursday at 7 o'clock in the morning because you've paid for that person, for example. So it was definitely when I started taking it more seriously. It wasn't like my whole world at that point still. But I remember doing my first interval session. I had like no idea how to program it into a watch. And I remember going to the park and being so confused what I was doing and just running loops of the lake in Kensington Park was like all I could think of doing. And I had no idea how to even look at what split I'd run or anything. And Adam would be like, no, send me this, send me that, send me the other. And that's where I kind of started really realizing that with some good structure and routine and the right help and support, that you could make a go of it if it was what you wanted to do.
I think that's really important as well to talk about, isn't it? And you do that brilliantly on your socials already, kind of talking about your whole journey. But for somebody coming in that's new to running, that maybe sees people on socials and sees, these incredible close to 3-hour marathon times or 5K PBs just kind of falling, you started somewhere, and everyone starts somewhere, and
100%.
we've all had that journey.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I have a very love-hate relationship with social media. And I think last year I really took some time away from it because I was just finding it was really negatively affecting my mental health. I think it's such a fantastic platform. And I mean, I'd be a complete hypocrite if I didn't, because I think it's a fantastic platform to share your journey, encourage other people. I only found out what endometriosis was and went and kind of saw a doctor because I found these other people who had the same symptoms as me and were struggling with the same thing. I think social media can be such a positive thing, but you really have to kind of curate the world that you're giving yourself on social media. So I am really strict with it now that if I'm digesting content that makes me feel rubbish, I will like mute or unfollow that person. And I hope people do the same with me. If it's not something that's positive and helping them, they should do that. And I think that's the biggest thing is I can share and share and share, but realistically, it's whatever piece of content makes you fall across me that you digest. And that might be, I don't know, that I ran a 5K PB a couple of weeks ago, and you might not scroll back and see the whole story, if that makes sense. And I also, as someone who creates content and enjoys it, can't create every piece of content being like, okay, so I started in 2017 and then this is where I was by 2018. And it's kind of why I really enjoy doing podcasts and things like that sometimes, because it helps to explain your story a little bit more and give a lot more perspective of the situation. And I do wish that kind of every post I did or like other people did came with a kind of, but this is where I came from, so don't think this is where you should be now. But that comparison never stops. Like I compare myself now to the next people that I'm trying to kind of work towards and be more, not more like, but aspire to achieve the similar things to what they're achieving. But yeah, I think social media can be a really fickle place, and it's important to just remember that there is a bigger story behind everything that you're kind of consuming on there.
One lesson I've definitely learned with it as well is, you know, I've actually been in, I don't think I've ever said this before, but I've actually been in a race before in an ultra, and I've thought to myself, it's come into my head, right, you need to get this done because imagine how many likes this post is going to get. And you're like, what a ridiculous thing to think, because that's like, it's not why I do it. It's not why I've ever done it. But in that moment, that came into my head and I was like, right, there needs to be a balance here. You do 100%. This because you love it. You don't do it because somebody's going to click a little heart on a screen.
Yeah. And then like people often say to me, like, why did you start posting about your running? Or why did you say, like, favorite question, why do you think anybody cares? Which is a fair point. Why does anyone care? Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, why do these people care? But I think the biggest thing for me was I never intended to like create content. Like that wasn't what I intended to do. I started sharing a little selfie from the gym because it kept me accountable to the next day when I wanted to go, being like, no, that's how you felt yesterday. That will help. Like you should go tomorrow, for example. And basically all my friends got so bored of following my personal Instagram because all it was fitness content, and I ended up changing it into a running page, essentially. But it was always to kind of share my journey more than anything else. And I genuinely have quite a creative side as well, and I used to do that in my job. So before I moved over to kind of coaching, I used to work in marketing and branding and media and social media, and actually that gives me a place to still continue to do that. It might not be my full-time job anymore, but I still really enjoy doing that. And so it gives me a kind of hobby to do that with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's always, you know, being out on the road is always the place as a creative as well. You always come up with your best things, don't you? So if you can create whilst you're training or doing whatever you're doing, it's the best of both worlds. I want to talk about your journey with endometriosis. You've already mentioned that it was kind of social media that made you go and see a doctor for the first time. Can you talk to me just about your journey up to this point and kind of how it's affected your running as well? Yeah,
I think it's a big one because now I look back and I see that it's affected my life so much from the age of kind of 12, 13. And at the time, I never really digested or looked back on that. But I now actually realize that I had horrific periods as a teenager that meant I missed school, I missed classes, I couldn't concentrate in exams or things like that. And actually, I look back now and I realize how much of my life it has affected negatively. And I kind of have to step away from that slightly, because I spent a lot of time when I was first diagnosed being really angry at the world and being really
why didn't I know sooner?
Really angry at people, and why didn't someone help me sooner? Because maybe I would have got a better grade in this, or maybe I would have run better, or all these things. And you can be angry, but it's not going to get you anywhere. It's basically what I learned. It's never going to get you any further forward. So I try not to look back at things like that now and get frustrated, but I do think it's important as a whole picture to understand kind of when symptoms can first occur, and looking back now how that happened for me as well. But I guess really for me, it was during COVID that I started to have kind of quite severe symptoms. I'd had really bad periods from day one, essentially 12, 13 years old. And as I'm sure many people have experienced here, went to the GP at that time, what we're talking like 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
At that time, there was, in comparison to what there is now, where there's no research into female healthcare, there was no research into female healthcare at all. And the number one thing, and it still happens now, but at the time, to help control periods was, well, just take the pill because that should help with things. It might stop your periods or it might make them lighter. And so I spent my whole teenage years on the pill with no symptoms whatsoever. For me, it stopped periods completely, which I actually found a really, really positive thing. And if you're on a pill that is meant to do that, it is completely safe for that to happen. I think there's a lot of kind of narrative around the fact that that's not safe. There are contexts where not having a period is absolutely and completely safe. And for me, it just meant that I had no symptoms, no sign. Like, I was kind of happy as Larry. I did have some occasions where I would get kind of chronic pelvic pain. There were times where I came off the pill or swapped medication, because as you're growing up through your teenage years, I suffered with my mental health. And was that related to the pill that I was on, for example? So it was like turbulent at times, but mainly it really, really helped things for me. And then it was during COVID, essentially, I had swapped on to having a coil rather than taking the pill just before, well, I was probably like 18, 19 years old when I did. And for no reason other than convenience, really, to be honest. I didn't want to forget to take a tablet. And for me, it was what I wanted to do at the time. And during COVID, that kind of coil that I had was coming to an end in terms of the hormone that it was releasing. So it was still safe, but all of a sudden I started getting a lot more symptoms, essentially. Chronic pelvic pain, lower back pain, migraines, sickness and nausea, like all these things that you experience. And I had no idea what was going on. I thought I was going nuts, really, is what I thought was going on at the time. And I went back and forth to the doctors 5, maybe 6 times, got absolutely nowhere. Solutions were anything from, oh, put up with it, here's some stronger painkillers. And I got to a point where I was on some very, very strong painkillers 3-4 times a day that it's not something you should be doing long term. Or have your coil taken out, changed, see if that makes it feel better. But I just had this fundamental niggling feeling that something was really wrong and that it shouldn't be this complicated either. And my sister is a GP. So I'm very thankful that I also kind of had her knowledge to help me digest that situation as well. But essentially, I just started Googling things that could be wrong. I went to the dark web of Dr. Google, and yeah, so many things came up. And then I stumbled across this condition called endometriosis and kind of read through all the symptoms and was like, this is literally what is wrong with me. And I remember sending either like a screenshot or the link to that page to my sister at the time and going, do you think this is what could be wrong? Because I seem to have all of these symptoms and we don't have an explanation as to why or anything. And it would make sense as to why it was controlled before and not now and all these things. And then I started kind of searching on social media about endometriosis or looking for other people who had it to try and understand whether it was what I had. At the time, I had managed at that point to get a referral to NHS gynecology. This is 5 years ago. I've still not been seen. If anyone wants a perspective on what the waiting lists are, I have the utmost respect for the NHS. My whole family works in the NHS. This is not a dig at all. It's the reality of the situation that we have women waiting for this period of time with conditions that are debilitating their lives, essentially. I made a decision to go private and luckily had access and to be able to do so. And from that point, it was probably about after being on the waiting list for about a year, I would say, that kind of sat down with my family and we had a real conversation of, we could see how unwell I was. I was struggling to function. I was on an extremely high amount of painkillers that I just wasn't with it, like, at all, because if I didn't take the painkillers, I was in pain, so I wasn't with it. And if I took the painkillers, then I wasn't with it because the painkillers would pretty much make me high as a kite. And from that point, when we made that decision that it was something that I was going to kind of go forward seeing someone privately, everything happened very, very quickly from that point. All of a sudden, like, we might get to you in 6 months for an initial appointment turned into you can have surgery next week if you want to. And it was really scary that it happened that quickly, but in a way I'm kind of glad it did, because it didn't give me long to sit on things and worry about things. But one of the things with endometriosis, and there's actually a great piece about this in Women's Health magazine this month that someone I know called Chloe has written, and it's fantastic, that the only way to diagnose endometriosis is surgery, which is crazy. Like, we're waiting for women to have surgery to diagnose them with something. Like, why are even our methods of diagnosis so archaic when it comes to women's healthcare? Is kind of one of the biggest things that's now coming to light. And yeah, for me, I went in, had my surgery, and I said this the other day to someone, I wasn't scared of finding out that I did have endometriosis. I was scared of coming out and someone telling me that there was nothing there and they couldn't work out what was wrong. Actually, having a diagnosis was what I wanted in a really strange and bizarre way. But yeah, it's massively affected my running. Did I notice that at the time? Probably not. But looking back now, you have a picture of all these things that have been affected by something that has happened to you. And it's not all plain sailing. Like, just because I've had surgery to have my endometriosis removed doesn't mean that I'm completely symptom free and will be for the rest of my life. Like, I know it will grow back. I know it's a matter of time rather than if it will happen. But I'm also in a much better place with, when I do have bad days, they're bad days or bad 48 hours rather than months of chronic pain that I was in before. Yeah, that's kind of the whole story, I would say.
It feels like, asking, did it affect your running, is almost such a naive question, because it's affected every part of your life. Yeah, it's not just that. So that's a small part of it that you can now look back on. You mentioned there kind of, you were almost more worried about coming out and them saying, look, we don't know what's wrong. Was it almost a relief to know this is what has been, affecting my life?
Yeah, 100%. And I remember waking up from my surgery and speaking to my nurse, Nadia. I love Nadia. She's great.
Go on, Nadia.
Still see her now when I go in for appointments. So she always gives me a hug and she's like, Lillie, how are you? She's the best. But I remember waking up and Nadia being there, and I was just like, can you tell me, like, have they found anything? And she was very like, I'm not really supposed to be the one that tells you anything. I wasn't in there, so let me go see when the doctor will be coming to talk to you. And as with all these things, they pretty much back-to-back people throughout the day. So they'll do like loads of operations, and then in the late afternoon into the evening, the doctor will come around and speak to you, but that can mean that you're kind of left for a prolonged period not knowing really what's happened. But I remember her coming back and kind of saying, he'll come and speak to you properly later, but to put your mind at rest, yes, you do have endometriosis. It's stage 2. I was also diagnosed with a secondary condition called adenomyosis as well, which I'd already researched and kind of knew what that was. So, but yeah, I mean, I remember just bursting into tears, and she was like, don't cry, we can help you now, we have the information. And I was like, that's why I'm crying, because I'm not crazy. Like, everyone's been telling me I've been making this up in my head, or it's just period pain that you should deal with. Like, I'm not crazy. This is actually the best thing that could have happened, despite the fact it being a bad thing to happen, if that makes sense. And I think that's what I hear a lot of from women who I speak to, or women who reach out who are advocating for themselves and want to know what's wrong, is they're scared to find out that actually nothing is wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I also know that the way I'm speaking about this isn't the case for a lot of people, because the way that the systems work in the NHS of how long it takes to actually find out what has happened in your surgery is very different. You go for a follow-up appointment, what can be kind of months after, and you still don't even know at that point. So I'm very, very grateful that I had access to the level of care that I had access to as well. But that's also why I get so frustrated about the situation, that I still look at women around me who've been on a waiting list as long as I have, and you can see how debilitated their life is by it, and how much this has given me my quality of life back as well. And it's, no one's in the right, no one's in the wrong. The NHS is hugely overwhelmed by understaffing, by the fact that COVID just threw a spanner in the works for absolutely everything. But I just kind of want to shake the world and tell it to help these women sometimes.
It just feels like the wrong way round, doesn't it? It feels like people like yourself that are experiencing these debilitating symptoms shouldn't be forced to be Googling and sending articles to members of their family being like, could I have this? That's what's kind of so upsetting. And also the fact that when you think about your story, there are probably tens, hundreds of thousands of women that have been through the same thing and not realized that this is what it was, through history. And 100%. It's, to look back at that, it's quite sad.
Quite
really.
Sad. Yeah, it's quite sad sometimes, because the stat that we have is that 1 in 10 women have endometriosis, right? So, and that stat, but that stat is based on the knowledge that we have of women who have endometriosis. So actually, in reality, it's much higher than that, probably, like much, much higher.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, though, I can look back at a doctor who I saw 15 years ago and be annoyed that at the age of 12, you couldn't have thought, oh, this could be what's wrong. But equally, there was no research at that point. There was no awareness of endometriosis really as a disease, as an illness. And actually, as something becomes, as we have more awareness of an illness, more people will be diagnosed with it, because more people will be aware of what it is. More doctors will be aware of what it is and how it can affect people's lives. More people will be aware of what the symptoms are, like all these things. So it's very easy, as I said earlier, to be that angry person who just hates the world and is pissed off at a doctor from when they were 12 years old, but actually it's going to get you nowhere. And that's why I think the way I dealt with it was to channel my energy into thinking, well, how can I help other people? And it might, I'm not a doctor, I'm the only person in my family that can't deal with blood. So I'm never going to be able to do research or help in any of that kind of way. But what I can do is I can talk about my journey, because that might make you realize that other people out there have this too, or it might make you realize, oh, maybe that's what I've had, and be the first step in the journey to helping you have a life that has a better quality of living as well. But it's a really tough one, because I also think we live in a world where there's always going to be people who have something that's worse than you or have a different condition. And there's just so much comparison as well. And that's why it was quite scary sharing my journey on social media, because I would often get responses being like, oh, so you have bad periods, like people are dying. Like that would be the response. And it's just, otherwise we're never going to get anywhere if no one's sharing anything. So for me, it's a case of I will want to do what I can, which is I can help raise money, raise awareness, raise the profile of an illness. I can't help more than that, but at least I've done something, is how I looked at it.
Yeah, and your maturity to be able to look at it kind of objectively and think, look, I need to just accept this. There's no point in me holding, I'm not going to, a grudge is the wrong word, but, you know, holding that, you know, emotion within yourself against your younger self who saw those doctors. It's about moving forward and helping as best you can. And I think 100%. That's exactly what you're doing. So
yeah, 100%. And I think that was probably the hardest thing to do as well. And it's only now I'm just over 2 years since I had surgery. And to be fair, I've probably only really had that attitude about it for like the last year or so. But equally, people did say to me at the time, Nadia, again, love Nadia, did say to me at the time, like, you're allowed to be angry, have that time to be angry. And I say this to my clients about races, like when it goes wrong, have that period of time to be upset, angry, annoyed, but you need to set an expiry date on being upset, angry, and annoyed, because otherwise you're never going to move on and you're never going to get anywhere. So whether that was for me, like I'm going to have a year of trying to understand what's happened here, being angry, looking back, trying to digest what's taken place. And then after that, I just have to move on. Or whether that's someone who's had a rubbish 5K race at the weekend and they've given themselves 48 hours to be annoyed about it, digest what went wrong, work out what they're going to do next, and then moved on from it. I do think setting that kind of timeline on when you have to kind of get on with life is quite a good method that I use with quite a lot of things as well these days.
Yeah, I love that you're applying your coaching brain to kind of day-to-day life. Do you find that though, because you know you learn lessons through running, don't you? You learn these things, these coping mechanisms, these ways of dealing with problems you have 100%. To overcome and move forward. Do you do that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I kind of find myself, sometimes I find myself wanting to shake myself. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. But absolutely. And my dad has this saying, and it drives everybody in the family absolutely nuts. And I could have put money, my sister got married last year, and I could have put money on like my dad managing to worm this into his bride speech. And we were all sat there rolling our eyes like, here we go. Of course, he's managed to get it in. He just loves it. And that is, everything happens for a reason and it all works out in the end. And as much as a teenager, your dad telling you, well, everything happens for a reason, it'll all work out in the end. Shut and up. All you want to do is scream at him. Yeah. He is actually very correct. And I'll find myself sometimes saying to clients, like, but remember, this going badly has given us all these things that we've now taken away and gone, okay, well, we need to work on this, this, and this. And then it won't happen badly. And everything does happen for a reason. So I hate the saying, but there we are.
And I mean, for you personally, the thing is, without your history, without everything that's happened in your running story, your health, your whole life, you know, personal experiences, whatever, you wouldn't be the person that you are now. You wouldn't be where you are now, and you wouldn't be the person that you're going to become in the future. So, I mean, I'm not going to say it as well because your dad's already said it, but I think he's right. I think he's right.
No, he is. We'll let Bob have that one.
Yeah, go on, Bob.
Yeah, we just all roll our eyes every time he says it. And then I can hear myself rolling my eyes when I say it to somebody else.
But you just repeating it means that you know old Bob's right, so that's all good.
Definitely.
Looking forward then on your running journey, where are we going next? What are the goals? Because it does really seem to be that things are falling into place right now.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting one. I had a pretty rubbish year of racing last year, to be honest. I had a lot going on in my personal life that I found very, very difficult to step away from. My partner wasn't very well, and I probably should have just stepped away from racing for the year, if I'm honest. It was one of those kind of, I have too much on my plate. This is too overwhelming. I had a pretty rubbish race at London Marathon, and to be honest, like, happily talk about it now, basically think I spent 26.2 miles having an anxiety attack, if I'm really honest. Like, I just felt anxious about being there, anxious about the result of the, like, everything was just catastrophizing. And then decided to still do Berlin later in the year, but very much knew that life was going to be really quite difficult for that 6-month period, and knew that going into it. But my partner was very like, I want you to have that time for yourself with everything that we're going to be going through as well. Like, you having that goal and being able to step away for 2 hours and go, I have to remove myself from this because I've got to go train, will be good headspace for you as well. And it absolutely was. And I trained really, really hard for it. I knew what the goal was in my head. I didn't get it, but I also came away at that finish line being really proud of myself as well. And I remember texting my coach Adam afterwards, and he was like, are you okay? And I was like, I actually don't care. Like, I genuinely don't care that I didn't get the goal that I set myself, because I raced smart. I didn't act like an idiot at any point, and kind of I got myself here despite everything that was going on. So for me, Berlin last year was very much get the job done rather than stress about it too much. And yeah, after kind of last year being quite a tough year, I just decided not to run a spring marathon this year. I didn't want to go straight back into marathon training, and also kind of just wanted to do some faster, like speedier stuff across half marathon, 10K, 5K first. But yeah, spring season is kind of now over for me, I guess. And I will be going back to Berlin in September is the plan. So back to the marathon in September. I've got Edinburgh half at the end of May. So that's the next thing for me. But to be honest, the goal that I originally had for Edinburgh half in May, I kind of already ticked off last month in Cambridge. So again, I'm not like overly stressing about it or anything. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to run hard. If that comes off in a time, that comes off in a time. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then, yeah, Berlin, really, all guns blazing.
It's amazing to hear and to see that, you know, we've already spoken about that level of maturity and acceptance when it comes to health. But I think that's such an important lesson as well, isn't it, when it comes to running? You said, you know, after that first marathon, I'll never do it again, sat in a pub, entered another one.
Yeah.
And we all do that. We've all been through that. And we've all, you know, wanted to do marathon, or race. Actually, sometimes the most important thing is to take a step back, isn't it? And to be like, look, for me right now, entering another marathon might not be the best idea.
Yeah, 100%. I'm always very open with people about the fact that I struggle with marathon blues. Like, after a marathon, we kind of like mentally prepare ourselves in the household that I'm not going to be a very nice person for like 5-6 weeks, if I'm really honest. I know that it happens, and that's absolutely fine. And it was something I was talking about the other day, in the fact it's really normal. Like, a lot of people struggle after you've been working towards this huge goal. You've had regime in your life for like 12, 16 weeks, and all of a sudden that's just gone, and you're a bit like, well, what am I meant to be doing? Like, what is the meaning of life? Like, all of this. But for me, I just knew going into a spring marathon wasn't the right choice for my mental health, basically. And I did go back and forth on it. And then the other day, hilariously, was joking with my coach, because to be honest, the mileage that I'm running is what used to be kind of marathon mileage for me. And I did joke the other day. I was like, should I just go do a 20 miler next week and then do a spring marathon for fun? And he was like, no. I was like, good job, someone brought me back down. But also, I've never really had that period of time. Like, I've always, other than COVID, where you literally couldn't race, I've always been like, I'll do a spring and then I'll do an autumn. Never really had the time to really build a much higher base of mileage. And like, my weeks that I'm running right now are what used to be peak marathon week mileage. So I'm really excited to go into another marathon block with a much better base to then work off as well. And also just a slight dread, but quite excited to see where marathon training takes me with that change having happened as well.
And it's your body just adapting, taking in those years, isn't it? Taking in all of those races, all of those blocks, and moving forward, you're going to be, you know, a different athlete, which is so exciting. It's so exciting.
It's really exciting. But I think, like, I again was saying this to someone the other day, and it's so strange because when you take up running, everyone thinks you're nuts, and it's like, well, you ran a half marathon, that's insane. You ran a marathon, that's ridiculous. And it becomes normal, and that's really sad. It becomes like normal because you run, you surround yourself with people who also run, because you're going to running clubs or the gym, or you make friends with people who also have a shared interest in the same thing as you. And therefore, running a marathon, running a half marathon, running a 10K becomes like normal, and something that you start kind of shrugging off as, oh yeah, but it was only a marathon. Like it's not a big deal kind of thing. And I remember when after London last year, I met all my friends after, and I was just in floods of tears, and like nobody was stopping the waterfall that was taking place at that point. And all my friends were like, what are you on about? You've just run a marathon. And none of them are runners. And I think that's when it hit me of being like, this isn't normal, Lillie. What you're doing isn't normal. Like, these people think you're crazy for running that kind of distance. Have some respect for yourself for the fact that that is something that you do regularly. But also, I think just taking myself away from it for 6 months, when I go back to it, will hopefully make me see it more like that as well, that it's not normal, that it's something that's really special to go and do, no matter what happens on the day.
And that's a lovely message to kind of wrap it up, I think, to say, like, it's never normal, it's always special. Like, you've always got to give yourself that pat on the back. And even if you're feeling absolutely rubbish for 6 weeks after the race, you've done it, you've worked towards it, and you've achieved something amazing. There will 100%. Be people listening to this that are running marathons in the coming weeks. I'm not running one for a while, and that's going to make me very jealous, and I'm sure you're going to be very jealous, especially London Marathon Day. But what would be your one piece of advice that you'd give everybody leading into their race?
Yeah, I think you can have a goal, you can have what you're setting out to do. And I always just encourage people to set like a bronze, silver, gold, or like an A, B, and C goal, because you can only control the controllables. I wish I could bribe the weatherman, but I can't bribe the weatherman. I don't know that you're not going to trip over. Like, anything can happen on the day. And the biggest thing for me is that the primary goal whenever you go and do something like this should always be to enjoy it. And people always say to me, you just look like you're having so much fun while you're doing it. And I'm like, yeah, probably because I'm slightly nuts, but also because I genuinely believe if you're not doing it with a smile on your face, that there is absolutely no point. Because why did you take up running in the first place? Because you enjoyed it. So why put yourself through a race day that you're miserable on and aren't going to enjoy? So whenever you get a little bit down or stressed out while you're running in the race, just put a smile on your face, and I promise it will help things feel a little bit more rosy, and probably make running feel a little bit easier as well.